Today, we're on an 11,000 acre peach and pecan orchard in southern Georgia, sitting down with Michael Pisciotta, CEO and founder of Poma Ag Group, a biological consulting firm. Michael brings decades of experience in agronomy, including time as director of the Southeast for a major fertilizer retail company. My name is Jack Washburn, and today we're going to be diving into the transformation happening across the industry and what farmers and crop consultants need to understand about biologicals and how to navigate this new market. So first, walk me through your whole career. How'd you get to where you are now?
Man, I got to go back because, man, there's really no such thing as being born with a silver spoon in agriculture. I don't really believe that. But, I was born in Tifton, Georgia, and there's been more amazing, groundbreaking research happen in Tifton, Georgia than anywhere else in the world, it seems like. I had agricultural researchers and professors that coached my t-ball team. I had them in my church. I had them everywhere. And I never really knew what they do, Jack. I never knew what they did until I got in college at the University of Georgia. And then I said, wow, I didn't know I had a world expert in mole crickets that, I hung out at his house with his son. His son was my age and, he had a cool bug collection, but I didn't really know about what that was. And so I had all these awesome influences. And then coming out, I was able to work on the regulatory side of things for agriculture, which was a tremendous blessing. I learned so much, but I got to reconnect with a lot of those people that I had grown up with, and they saw me in a different way. And so over time, I had done a couple of different things, but then I came to work for a fertilizer manufacturer that was very invested in biostimulants and proprietary technology. And so I got to be a regular salesperson first for that. Then I got to be a sales manager, and then I ended up as a director for, really agronomic pipeline conversations and what those look like for product life cycle. And so I learned from some great people doing that. Some were all over the country, so having different, influences that had different cropping systems in their background, and they treated me extremely well. I mean, I could name all these people off, but I would miss some of them. And through that, I got a chance to really do some cool stuff. A couple of the highlights of things that I did was I was involved with the Next Gen Fertilizer Challenge for the US EPA and USDA and the National Corn Growers Association. And our manufacturer ended up having 2 products selected as finalists. And there was only 2 companies that had 2 products selected. And the only product that was selected in nitrogen and phosphorus was one of our products. And so that was a really amazing experience being involved in the EEF challenge. But also I've been very thankful to be involved with the Fertilizer Institute. The Fertilizer Institute has been an absolute incredible advocate for the biostimulant industry. I cannot give enough credit to Corey Rosenbush and Ed Thomas and Dr. Leanna Nigon and all of their team there at TFI, because they've really stewarded and spearheaded a lot of these efforts to bring credibility to a very confusing, very complex industry. Within that, I was, had some really great help at authoring a submission for a certified biostimulant material, and we were able to be the very first fertilizer additive to be certified as a biostimulant material. So
what is a biostimulant, just for the people watching?
Yeah, so a biostimulant is any material that it does 3 primary things. It's kind of how folks are looking at it. It could be a tool that helps increase a plant's abiotic stress tolerance. It could have a benefit as far as nutrient use efficiency. So how does that plant metabolize something like nitrogen, or maybe how does it fix nitrogen through different processes in the plant or in the soil? And also, does it stimulate and enhance microbial communities in the soil? And so that's kind of the trickiest one right now, because there's lots of ways to do that, and the soil microbiome is so complex. And so there's some real thought about that as far as, how are we measuring that? What should we be looking for? What is the newest technology for these tests that we need to be looking at?
That's incredible. And in addition to the nationwide, you've been all over the world doing, agricultural trials and helping people's problems, all over the world. Talk to me about some of those examples.
I've been really fortunate to collaborate with different folks around the world. Everywhere around the world, they have different agronomic issues, but the people is the central element, because, you know, we're trying to help people that have, you know, a livelihood, you know, that is dependent on agricultural production, and we need to find solutions for them. And we also have a massive problem with people just being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And what that overwhelming sense is, it causes lots of mental health and practical issues for people that are involved in agriculture. And any way that we can help people cut through the noise, simplify things for what they're doing, is a real benefit to people right now.
So I wanted
is.
to, you know, you're the person I would like to talk to, or I think would have the best pieces of wisdom from your time looking at biostimulants throughout your entire career. And now, you know, it's coming at the forefront of what everybody's talking about, and different people have different ideas. And you know, I see online different people constantly arguing with each other. And, you know, when I see that, you know, I'm viewing these arguments that I'm seeing online. It's like all these people have completely different agricultural contexts. You know, you got a Midwest annual crop production system guy arguing with, you know, a Southeast, you know, perennial orchard system.
Yeah.
And so it's like everybody's right. You know, that's something that we keep coming to that conclusion. And so I wanted to get your hot takes on, you know, what you think is kind of the most misunderstood piece of all of this, and also what are some things that you personally have changed your mind on in the past 10 years, just so people know that they're allowed to change their mind on things too?
Yeah. Well, I changed my mind a lot, first of all, so I want to say that. So I guess where I'm going goes back to that point. So, you know, I don't know if I would say I'm an expert. I'm an expert on listening and trying to talk to different people and understand different philosophies. Also, you know, I'm highly curious about the scientific aspects of this. Also, you know, not going to be, you know, every time that something has come up or a grower has approached me and said, Michael, do you think this will work? You know, my judgment has never been like, let me find a research article first.
Right.
My always judgment is find someone else that's tried it.
Yeah.
And ask them about it and see what they think. And so, you know, my expertise is in listening. Regardless of what other, you know, people think, I really do try to listen. And I want to say this too, like, there are so many people in the biostimulant industry that have been involved in incredible manufacturers, incredible companies, you know, that have been leaders in this industry for 30 years. Yeah. Once again, I could name names. I'm not going to, but I just look at someone like Lynn Smith right now, that is the chairman of the Biostimulant Council for TFI. His family's business is in the humic substance material business. And, you know, he told me one time, he said, Michael, we've had more change in the past 18 months than we did in 30 years of people paying attention to us. And so if I would say anything to a grower, I would say, hey, listen, you know, these things, they're rapidly changing as far as how we look at them, how we perceive them, the science behind them, you know, and how folks like the USDA and the EPA feel about them. And so we're in a really humongous knowledge sharing transfer cycle right now. We're understanding about where things start and stop, and if they don't start and stop, but we're really understanding about how they fit into a system. And so, you know, going back to me changing my mind all the time, you know, I would tell a grower, I would say, hey, listen, you know, what we've learned in the past 18 months is this, and, you know, have it lead into the research questions that you've been trying to ask as a product agronomist. What evidence have you found for this? Share the good and the bad. Share where it really shined. Share where it didn't shine so much. You know, build trust through truth. And I think there's a certain element to that too, where everybody wants a bunch of hot takes because people are going to get clicks online.
Right.
But we're not really after a click war. We're after a production war, and we're after an environmental situation that is always changing. And so it's us versus us in that regard. And my thoughts always change, because if I have a piece of evidence that looks a certain way, I have to take it at face value and say, what does this look like? Does it look like something I've seen before? Does it look totally different? You know, there's some elements of the industry right now that people have kind of neglected for a long time. And now,
what are some of those?
well, I really think one of those is the use of animals in agriculture.
Talk to me about that. I've been
Yeah.
seeing that more and more, and
Yeah.
in the past 80 years, they have separated, and now we're seeing them come back together. And it seems like us as humans we had that wisdom of animals integrating in agriculture, and then we're like, never mind, let's disregard all of that. And then now we're doing all of this research, and we're coming back to that exact conclusion. And I'm seeing that more and more, online and with the growers I'm talking to, and that kind of thing. Walk me through kind of what you've been seeing in that regard.
Oh man, I've been seeing a huge appetite for that from growers, just because they say, we've heard about regenerative practices and that we're supposed to be putting animals on the land. We've heard about that, but also we have a food crop that we have strict regulations that we're literally not supposed to have animals out here.
Right.
Or maybe we can't use a manure source, or we can't use a certain thing. And so what we have is we have that interest. And so, but there's a lot of these other ways, these inherent benefits of animals that we can put out there. Maybe you can use litter. Okay, that's great. But what are we finding out about these different things? Well, we're finding out a lot of them share a microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
And these systems, it's all about kind of like, basically, what are you doing to create resilience? Because I think, regenerative is going to get a lot of talk about different things, but really what it boils down to, are you creating a resilient system? And these animal-based materials, whether they're insect-derived materials, like insect frass or different derivatives of that, whether they're manure-based derivatives or distilled versions of compost extracts and teas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those are getting a lot of publicity. People are using those in larger conventional systems, like Johnson-Sioux reactors.
Yeah.
There's lots of conversations about things that people can use, and they're all in the name of this shared kind of environment scenario.
So we have reintegration of animals, and I think that can be separated into kind of two ideas of the actual live animal on the operation through the rows, kind of what we see in feel-good documentaries between, I'm seeing that a lot with wine production and having sheep graze through the vines. And then on the other side, it's, okay, maybe we can't have live animals on this operation due to EPA regulations and, of federal regulations and food safety issues. So instead, we're going to opt for, maybe manure is a bit, lower under that regulation. It's a bit easier, and maybe manure, like in an organic system, you can't apply manure like under 120 days before it's harvested a lot of times. And so then So then we opt for a more refined material that's not raw manure, that's these new products that are coming onto the market. And so that kind of spectrum of live animal to manure to the animal-derived products that we can apply is that idea of the core principle in regenerative ag of reintegrating animals onto the farm.
Yeah.
Break down why that's important. Why are we shifting our fertility programs from CAN 17 to putting sheep between rows? That's a big...
It is a big jump. Yeah. No, it's a big jump. And I think people are looking for ways to definitely think outside the box creatively. And they're looking for ways to, maybe they have a byproduct, or maybe they have a want to do something very different than what they've done for, maybe they don't have somebody to operate their flail mower or their mowing of row middles, and they say,
So like a labor shortage brings people to do animal integrate, or like we're seeing, especially today, it's the third or fourth year of pretty difficult times across the country. And so people are figuring out this is difficult that word resilience is, how do we build up that resilience so when we have periods like this, it's not devastating.
Yeah, and the way that our consumer system is set up, Jack, is people do want to know the differences between how things are grown. And it's bad to have some labels, but also in one way, when people can connect with their farm through video, through social, through however, they're viewing things that are online content, they can get an idea of like, maybe I want to make a choice where I say, okay, how do I want my peach trees to look? How do I want my corn to be grown? Or how do I, even perceive things like synthetic fertilizer versus, a animal byproduct. And so it really comes down to a central element of like, I want this farm to last.
Right.
And, if I can have nutrients and do them well, then maybe I just reincorporate animal manures or green covers or some sort of other thing that helps me last.
And a lot of people may push back and they're like, I can't, my bottom line won't allow that. And we're seeing like, if this transition doesn't happen, the bottom line also won't allow that either. So now we're like caught in this, spot. Like when we're talking about resilience, it's, kind of walk me through how you've gone or what you've seen, maybe somebody that feels unable to make any kind of management decision because producers across the country are what's the word? It's like risk filled completely. I've said it before, not risk averse, it's risk like when a soil is full of water.
Like field capacity?
Yeah, well, like the risk is like fully filled.
Yes,
there's a word for that I saw.
Risk capacity. They're at risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So yeah, with producers across the country, they're a lot of times, it's not that they're like afraid of making changes, is they're already under an insane amount of risk and that their risk capacity is filled. And so looking at something that seems risky, but the goal is to de-risk and build that resilience, that's a conversation. Walk me through like maybe some of those conversations you've had over the past 10 years of talking to growers.
Well, the conversations I've had in the past 2 months, they're the same thing because people are looking right now for something different, and any way that they can get a premium, or maybe they have a certain market that they want to go to. A good example is conventional corn, or non-traded corn. And so a lot of folks are looking at that right now as they say, well, maybe I can just make one change and I can just go see how it's done. Because a lot of these guys, they don't have a setup that would allow them to transition to organic right now.
Right.
And so what they're trying to do is just key in on one change that they can make. And they're not making a huge change. A lot of them look through the lens of saying, I haven't planted any refuge corn in a bag before, and there's a lot of people that say, oh yeah, that's how I want to do my refuge corn, is like just put it in the bag and just we'll see what happens when I spray. But there's a lot of other people that have done it in a really systematic approach. And so a lot of folks are trying to take that lens, especially through broad acre crops, and saying, okay, I just want to make one change.
Right.
And I know I'm going to have limited tools. I know these tools might cost me different dollar amounts, but I just want to do one thing and see if I can do that and see if it makes me money, and then I'll try a little bit more. And so what they're trying to do is, say, okay, if I have to risk something, what am I willing to risk percentage-wise of what I'm doing, and see if I can 2x that.
Right.
They're definitely thinking through the lens of an ROI.
Yeah.
And so any small, that's going back to changing my mind all the time.
Yeah.
Any small change that I can do and tweak and ask somebody, would you consider this? Here's the evidence for it. Here's why it might make sense for your operation. Here's why I think, you should do this amount of it. And my conversation's never, I want you to go wall to wall with any of this.
Right.
It's always about saying, I know that based on your systems that, you have one block that's kind of unique. Like, let's try it on that block.
Right.
So I know you and I talked about best performing versus worst performing. People look at their soils that way too.
Definitely.
And so they need to be thinking in triplicate of saying a best, worst, and somewhere in the middle, maybe longest day variety, shortest day variety, somewhere in the middle. And then they can have some decent looks at some materials that can change how they think about their program, because they have to change. With these times, with this economy, they're going to have to change, Jack. And I think that's what's most important.
I think with those changes, tracking what happens, tracking outcomes, that's been a pretty key theme of 2026 is tracking outcomes, coming with the USDA. Now you have to track outcomes as a part of EQIP under the Regenerative Pilot Program. And
absolutely.
And those outcomes are tied to soil health, which everybody wants. Healthier soil, better ground. But being able to track that in a way that isn't just looking at it with your eye, which you can't see, between 1 year to the next, you make this change, then what? Like, how do you know if it worked or not? And now we have all of these new tools that are seemingly coming onto the market or have been on the market for the past 5 years, new lab analyses, new ways of measuring things so we can manage them better. What are you seeing as methods to figure out if the change they implemented worked or not? Especially if it's one block, like you have yield, but yield is often a lagging indicator of the thing that you're trying to change, especially when we're talking about resilience. And I want to hear your thoughts on how you would approach that conversation of what are we looking at changing? Maybe something's going down, maybe we make it go less down rather than making it go up in regards to certain scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the USDA in the months to come, and I know you know this, Jack, they're going to really be focused in on this SEMA 216, testing regimen. Within that, growers have kind of a suite of things that they can really look for. They can try to do it at scale. And that's what I would advise a grower to do right now. I would say, hey, listen, maybe you don't treat this like a 2.5 grid acre normal test, because of course, these are going to be
$500.
There's going to be some practical elements, but I do think that growers are going to have a longer term view of this. Obviously part of this is 3 to 5 years of what's going to be looking in the front of the windshield of where I'm driving in a single direction. And so there might be some things that are trade-offs. But I think through this exercise of looking at things, POXC or MAC or these other carbon measurements, or even things like PLFA, which are way more dialed in to, what's really happening in the field. When I was in Washington, D.C., talking to USDA and their Office of Programs, I looked at Undersecretary Fordyce and was able to say, do you know what a PLFA test is?
I did the same thing.
And he was really excited to hear about field things that I had used with a PLFA, where I could show practices and the differences of practices and what they mean for something like a PLFA exam.
Give me an example of that. I would love to hear. So you take a PLFA on 2 different blocks. One block, what do you do? And then what's the next PLFA? What does it say? And then the other block of control, you do another PLFA, stays the same. What did you change? What was that one practice? And then what was that outcome that you could only know if you're measuring the actual microbial life in the soil?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, a PLFA by itself in a single time point, you and I both know,
it doesn't.
It's really not a good indicator. And so what we were looking at originally when we started down this road, back in 2022, I had no idea what a PLFA was.
I think that could be said for most people.
And so in 2023, before we looked at deeper analytics, we went the PLFA route. And what we were looking for was, we're going to plant some corn, we're going to take a sample PLFA sample at planting. We're going to make an in-plant, in-furrow treatment right there, and in 30 days, we're going to pull another sample where we flagged it at. We're going to see how those microbial communities changed. We're going to get a delta based on that, and then we're going to see what kind of impact we made. And what we were using carbon sources. Some were complex, some were simple. We were using other kind of stress tools that were in furrow. And so what we saw with that, though, is we saw better bacteria to mycorrhizal fungi balance. We always saw an increase of diversity. These diversity numbers, they were really between 20 and 30%. But if you think about what you're doing, I mean, any yield metric that you had 5 to 10% increase on, so if I'm doing 30% in the soil, I feel pretty good about the trickle down effects of that.
Well, of course, with, as you increase your microbial diversity, right, that goes back to what you were talking about with resilience. And that's that's the whole idea, is like we're right now in this peach orchard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've got a little bit of diversity with these pecans intermixed, and then we have diversity in the middles. But what's more important than above ground diversity is like the below ground diversity for
Sure.
resilience.
Yeah.
What are some tangible, tactical, felt outcomes of having higher resilience of your soil microbiology through its diversity?
Man, first of all, it would surprise you. Like, what I would say is we don't really know where floors are until we have an area that maybe we forget about, or maybe we plan it because somebody said do this because we felt like we might have this kind of response. And so 2 examples that I'll quickly give you, Jack, is I recently heard a story about a watermelon grower in Florida that absolutely just forgot to make his upfront nitrogen application.
Wow.
Okay. And so, you know, most fruit and veg guys, they want to be first to harvest. They want to hit the ground running. They want them supercharged. One person left out a massive slug of nitrogen. He had the same liquid program, but what he realized was that even though he cut his nitrogen rates basically in half, that his production really only decreased about 20%.
So that's an increase in just our overall ROI.
So some people might look at that as a failure, right? Like these weren't the best watermelons in the world. But if you're a grower and you say, oh, I did this and I cut these, man, I'm in the, you know, this is all like icing on top of the cake situation over here. And so there are those stories, and it's not something that you would intend. He did not intentionally do that.
Right.
But in research operations, some of the best ones are ones that continue to try to find the floor of where they can be at. And what I mean by that is nitrogen rate specifically. You know, there's been some really good research in the northeast part of the country about high organic matter soils, how we treat those for side dresses of nitrogen for small grains or top dressing nitrogen for small grains. And I'm here to tell you, some of their nitrogen use efficiency scores are off the charts.
Wow.
So some of them are gaining, you know, over 2 on a bushel to pound nitrogen conversion rate. And so, but that's all about finding that floor. And you know, at some point you might have a bad year, or you might be trying this on somewhere that you don't know. So you also have to be careful about that.
Well, that's the thing, is every single operation has a different context. Every single operation has a different floor.
Yeah.
So it's, nobody can come in, maybe somebody can come in and off the bat say like, drop it by 10%, drop it by 15%, but to really know where that floor is, you probably have to run a lot of tests, and you have to do a lot of trials, and you have to get pretty dialed in on what your data's telling you.
Let me stop you right there, Jack, because what I want to say is you have to keep up with it, right? The reason great product agronomists stay employed is they keep up with it, okay?
Yeah.
And so, you know, for someone like Cultra to come in and be able to help a product agronomist keep up with a trial year over year, same place, understanding same test, reminders at the same time of sampling and analysis, is critical, because otherwise you're a grower, you're going in blind. Right. You're going in on wings and prayers and saying, hey, I have 10 acres that I forgot about. Maybe that's my floor. Well, no, you don't need to do that. Like, you need to have a little bit better of a system. And what Cultra has built has been an excellent example of that, because the biggest question is, all the companies want to claim less fertilizer, less inputs, less sprays. Well, how do you know? Well, you have to keep up with it. And Cultra's made that super simple, and which is why I'm so happy that we're able to have this conversation, because some product agronomists, they've done this a long time, and you know, they're in the numbers game. They're saying, you know, if I kept up with half of my stuff, it would be 3 times better than the guy down the road. But farmers, they need to know.
Yeah.
A lot of them have spent their time putting out materials. A lot of them have spent energy hiring people to keep up with this. We met with a large corporate agronomist earlier, and you know, he told us, he said, it's my job to scout. He said, I don't get paid to pull samples. I get paid to find problems. Yeah. And for him, being able to leverage a tool like Cultra and say, yeah, like that's where I need to be at to figure things out is a huge win.
What are you seeing that you wish you could just shake out of the industry right now? What's something that's like, you know, could be 20 years ago was this is the way to do it. And now there's been so much progress in the research. There's been so much new information coming out, but we're always going to have that disconnect between what is cutting edge and what is everybody used to, because everybody's risk profiles are so high. But what's one thing where we pretty much know across the board is like, we figured out a better way or a new way or something else that, you think maybe 50% or more of the country hasn't looked at or is not adopting?
Man, I think it's something as simple as saying, what's one new soil health metric that we can look at that maybe our local lab would offer? Maybe it's something that we've kind of turned our nose up because there's a $10 premium per test, or maybe it's some other kind of more nuanced, RNA sequencing, driven technology. Those things, we really just don't even know what we have out here.
Right.
And, some of them are more prescriptive toward functionality of soils. And so I do have to say that, a lot of these soil tests, it's not just you get what you pay for, but you also, can you understand them? And can you understand where they're going and how it's going to support your long-term change? Definitely. But I think not doing anything is the thing that I would shake out of the industry.
That's like the biggest risk right now, is just inaction.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And I think that it's coupled with a lot of people saying, I'm already strapped for time.
Right. And
so my first call, if I'm just asking a grower, what's one new thing you can measure, I would say, hey, give me something on my soil lab report that can tell me exactly, one of these metrics that the USDA Regen pilot program is talking about. Like, I've heard about this, I would ask the lab, have you heard about it? Is there something that you have that can potentially help me get an application in at some point?
Yeah.
So.
Right, because it's like, we look at our lab tests for the past 50 years, and it's like nitrogen through your microbes, it's your nitrogen through your microbes and pH, organic matter, and CEC. Yeah. And that's what we've accepted as truth of the thing to measure.
Yeah.
And as our mutual friend always says, you can only manage what you measure.
That's true. Yeah.
And it seems we've missed the thing to manage, and because we're not measuring it, because we didn't know that was something that was of utmost importance to be measuring.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just think we're going to see so many changes, Jack, and a lot of them, they might seem scary, but I think there's a lot of good tools out there. There's a lot of good testing out there. There are a lot of good products out there too. For anybody that says they have the best any one thing, I would challenge them to say, on what metric?
I find that to be, the biggest thing that kind of grinds my gears is when somebody says, well, we're the best, this is the best product, right? And it's like, I'm trying to find an example of something else. Like, you don't go to, if your car's broken, right, and you take it to the car shop and they say, oh, we're just gonna swap out your tires and without anything else. It's like, because we've got the best, it's like, that's not the way of going about it. You got to diagnose and you find the specific solution to the specific problem.
Yeah.
And I would like to see more of that coming from the inputs side of rather than saying, we can do across the board, fix all of your problems. I wish there was more marketing of, if your tests look like this, this product has risen these metrics on this cropping system, and this cropping system.
Oh yeah.
And I think that would help all of these, new input companies' sales and marketing ability, because right now it's like people are so inundated that they're beginning to grow a distrust for this industry that's really doing cutting edge and awesome, exciting work.
Yeah. So. Man, I want to say this really quick. Yeah. One tool that is a piece of hardware that I think has been shown in a lot of presentations now that I'm always fascinated with is a temperature gun, right? And so most people would see one of these if they're getting their HVAC or their air conditioning checked in their house. They point it at their vent and it gives them a temperature readout. Well, I've seen more temperature guns and FLIR thermals on soybeans now than I can remember.
Wow.
And so it's been amazing seeing these in presentations as a way to demonstrate biostimulant or abiotic stress efficacy or heat tolerance efficacy. But it's been really good because, they look at this gun and they say, all right, I'm measuring something, right? Like I can go out there and take a photo of the leaves and I got my hand on it and it's looking like 84 degrees. All right, is that good? Then I go next and it says 76 degrees. Is that better? And it gets people asking the question of okay, I'm not just measuring any yield.
Right.
I'm thinking about other things that probably play into that equation.
Right.
What if it doesn't play into yield? Am I going to play my chances? Is it a 9 out of 10 chance? Is it a 5 out of 10 chance? And so what's it worth? Like, what's my risk?
That seems to be that question of what influences yield most. Like you could have 10 different problems. One of those problems is probably the hardest ROI problem to solve, and that's the product you should be looking to apply to solve that specific problem. And it feels like the way you figure out what those 10 problems are is you have to do a bunch of tests, and then you look at that data and then you figure out, okay, I can solve this problem here. And when you shift an agronomic lens to figuring out what's the highest ROI problem rather than how can I, fully increase yield maximally.
Right, yeah.
That seems to be the conversation that we're moving towards.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I think this is an inherent precision ag framework conversation. Why I say that is, some of my friends that are precision ag specialists that are really bright, really gifted, they've hit me with this GEM kind of like analogy or this acronym. And the GEM stands for genetics times environment times management, right? And so those are precision elements that people are measuring, they're doing things related that are prescriptive. But the biggest one, Jack, that I would also say and shade growers out of like saying, okay, are things going to work on my farm? I'm going to look at that first letter, genetics, first, because I want to know if something has been the same for 30 years or it's something they improve upon every year. When I was talking with you in the peach orchard earlier, it was pretty obvious that these trees are on the end of their life cycle. But, okay, can I make, even though they're established, can I influence their management to impact yield? And so on a peach tree, I could have a whole different genetic tolerance to certain things. It could be all different kind of things from fertilizer to pesticides to even, traits of resistance. And, I need to know those things. And I see this conversation really playing out with biologicals because they go to the most heavily bred, heavily genetically researched and studied fields, which are broadacre crops, annual broadacre crops that people plant every year. And I would say this, even though there are new vegetable and seed varieties for fruits and veg that come out all the time, or maybe new rootstocks, or maybe some sort of cultivar that's just hitting the United States of America. A lot of these things, they have a whole different capacity for how they tolerate stress or climate. Right. And so I would say that the power G right there, power G for some people in Georgia means the Georgia Bulldogs, but for me in this conversation, the power G is genetics.
Definitely.
So.
Well, that's awesome. Michael, it's been such a pleasure being able to talk to you and have you on as our advisor and all of your help out here. And so, thank you.
Well, Jack, listen, buddy, I just want to say this. Agriculture is a pretty dark place right now. Yeah. And, we need to support each other. We don't have a whole lot of room for tearing people down. And I would hope that a tool like what you guys have been working so hard, so diligently, put lots of man hours and just effort into, and now are starting to really turn the corner. The industry needs tools that make our lives as simple as possible. And so I think there's a huge need, and maybe that's the biggest problem of all that we solve, is not necessarily can we try new practices and change minds and implement things that bring more resilience, but also how do we make our minds, clear, so that when we do have to make a decision on the fly, that we make the best decision. We don't have a million data points.